Hello, good morning. I, Dr. Soumya, welcome you all for today's OBG class, hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. As you all know, this is the most common and important topic in the obstetric practice, day in and out. So we'll have a discussion on this topic today. Coming to the introduction, it is associated with the severe maternal obstetric complications as well as the perinatal complications. The incidence of this disease is 5 to 10%. Which is the most frequent cause of iatrogenic prematurity, because we need to deliver the uh, baby early due to the complications in the pregnancy, which leads to preterm delivery, prematurity, and there is increased risk of oligohydramnios, IUGR, IUD, maternal cerebrovascular accidents, placental abruption, pulmonary edema, involvement of literally all the organs due to end organ damage. Hypertension in pregnancy, how do you diagnose this? When systolic BP is more than or equal to 140 mmHg and or diastolic BP is more than or equal to 90 mmHg, which is documented on two separate occasions at least 6 hours apart, but it should not be more than 7 days apart. Reading should be confirmed using appropriate measurement technique. Like, it should be measured after 10 to 15 minutes of the rest. If you find the first reading is higher, you should give a rest of 10 to 15 minutes and then record it again. Other criteria, but which are not the part of definition currently, include earlier, which was considered, was systolic blood pressure increased by 30 millimeter mercury above the baseline, or diastolic BP when it is increased by 50 mmHg above the baseline, or when there is increase in the mean arterial pressure by 20 mmHg. Now coming to the severity of hypertension. Non-severe hypertension and severe hypertension. Again, the non-severe is divided into mild and moderate. Non-severe hypertension is when systolic BP is between 140 to 159 mmHg and or diastolic BP between 90 to 109 mmHg. Again, it is subdivided into mild and moderate. Mild is when systolic BP is 140 to 149, diastolic BP is 90 to 99, and moderate is systolic 150 to 160 and or diastolic 100 to 110. And it's called severe when systolic is more than 160 or diastolic BP is more than 110 mmHg or both. Now, how to measure blood pressure? It should be measured in sitting position preferably, or in the left lateral supine position. Then the patient should be relaxed. Arm should be well supported. Measured in the right arm. The cuff should be at the level of the heart. The proper cuff size should be used, which should cover 80% of the arm circumference. Then slow deflation of the bladder should be done at the rate of 2 mmHg per second. From the start of Korotokov 1 to end of Korotokov 5 is recorded as from systolic to diastolic. The normal blood pressure changes in pregnancy normally. It decreases during the first trimester, reaching its lowest point at 20 weeks, then returns to pre-pregnancy levels during the third trimester. So that's why if there is no dip in the BP during the second trimester, that is again one of the predictive measure to tell that this patient might develop preeclampsia or hypertensive disorders of pregnancy later in her pregnancy. What is significant proteinuria in pregnancy? Total protein in 24 hours urine when it is more than 300 milligram, or protein creatinine ratio in random sample is more than 0.1. Classifications and definitions. There are 5 types of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. The first one is gestational hypertension, then the preeclampsia, eclampsia, chronic hypertension, and preeclampsia superimposed on chronic hypertension. Now coming to gestational hypertension. How do you tell this is gestational hypertension? The definition says new onset of hypertension after 20 weeks of gestation without proteinuria or other features of preeclampsia, followed by return of BP to normal within 12 weeks postpartum. This terminology replaces the term pregnancy induced hypertension, because even after the pregnancy the BP might be high up till 12 weeks. It is a retrospective diagnosis as well. So to term her as gestational hypertension or hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, you have to observe her till 12 weeks postpartum. How do you diagnose? by determining the severity of hypertension, measure protein excretion, that is by 24-hour urine collection, evaluation for the signs and symptoms of severe preeclampsia, perform certain laboratory evaluation, and which tells about the end organ involvement. Criteria for mild gestational hypertension. What should be the level of the BP to tell it is mild? BP more than 140 but less than, systolic BP more than 140 or and less than 160, and diastolic more than 90 to 110. Proteinuria, it is less in 24-hour urine collection. Platelet count here is usually more than 1 lakh per cubic mm. Liver enzymes are normal. Maternal symptoms are absent here, and there are no features of IUGR. How do you manage mild gestational hypertension? It is managed on an outpatient basis by weekly antepartum visits. Since it is a high risk pregnancy, you have to call her for frequent antenatal visits, and also instruct her on daily fetal movement or kick counting. Then also modified by physical profile, which includes NST and AFI. Fetal growth monitoring every 3 to 4 weeks by obstetric ultrasound. No antihypertensive therapy is required usually in a mild gestational hypertension, and no antenatal corticosteroids. And we can deliver the patient not before their EDD. That is, we can wait until the term, or at least up to EDD. But whatever kind of hypertension it is, you should never allow the patient to pass their EDD. That is, never allow them to go into post-dated pregnancy. The commonly used antihypertensives in pregnancy are beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, and centrally acting drugs. But AC inhibitors and angiotensin II receptors are avoided in pregnancy as it leads to fetal congenital anomalies. What is the risk of progression to preeclampsia? If the patient is having gestational hypertension, now what is her risk of going into preeclampsia? There is 15 to 25% risk of these women going in for preeclampsia, that is developing either proteinuria along with the hypertension or developing signs and symptoms of end organ damage. Then women with early onset of gestational hypertension are more likely to progress to preeclampsia than women with late onset. That is, if she develops hypertension earlier in the pregnancy, say second trimester, by the third trimester she may progress to preeclampsia. Then what is the rate of recurrence? That is, if she is having gestational hypertension in this pregnancy, what is the risk of she developing gestational hypertension in her successive pregnancies? There is risk of 22 to 47% in second pregnancy, which tends to recur again with a subsequent pregnancy, that is in third, fourth, and so on. What is the long-term prognosis? It is associated with the development of hypertension later in life. That is, she may remain as chronic hypertension later after the completion of pregnancy. And it is also associated with the development of diseases related to hypertension like cardiovascular diseases, chronic kidney diseases, and diabetes mellitus. Preeclampsia. What is preeclampsia? Which is the second form of hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. Preeclampsia is a more severe form than gestational hypertension. The definition: new onset of hypertension after 20 weeks of gestation along with the properly documented proteinuria or end organ dysfunction symptoms, followed by return of BP to normal within 12 weeks postpartum. That is, preeclampsia is gestational hypertension plus proteinuria and or plus end organ damage. Preeclampsia can also occur without proteinuria with the end organ dysfunction manifestation. So, it is not compulsion that preeclampsia women should have a proteinuria. Here what happens, she will have end organ damage signs and symptoms and lab findings along with the hypertension, but there may not be proteinuria. And edema is no longer considered a specific diagnostic criteria for preeclampsia, which was earlier included. Here in preeclampsia, what happens, along with the hypertension there is proteinuria, and here the proteinuria is severe, which is more than or equal to 300 milligram in 24 hours urinary sample, or protein creatinine ratio is more than 0.3, whereas in milder variety it was 0.1. and dipstick urine examination shows 1 plus, which is persistent or even higher. And here the platelet counts may be less than 1 lakh. Renal insufficiency, which is indicated by creatinine more than 1.1 milligram per dl, or there is doubling of the baseline. Then liver involvement, where there is serum amylase levels are twice the normal. Cerebral symptoms, which may include headache, visual disturbances, convulsions. If there is lung involvement, there will be development of pulmonary edema and pulmonary hemorrhages. These are the signs and symptoms of end organ damage. What are the risk factors in preeclampsia? They might be genetic predisposition, age parity, partner factors, because in the development of hypertensive disorder of pregnancy, there is also a role of paternal genetic factor. Then pregnancy factors, underlying medical conditions and others. Now coming to each one of it. In genetic predisposition, there could be family history, race and ethnicity, which is more common in blacks and Asians, pregnancy by ovum donation. That is in surrogate mothers, where the pregnancy is conceived by ovum donation. And age. In the teenage pregnancy, when the age is less than 18 years, or elderly primigravida when the age is more than 35 years, or there is long gap between the pregnancies, say when it is more than 10 years, and also in nulliparity. Coming to partner factors, what will happen when there is change of partner? Limited sperm exposure, pregnancy by donor insemination, partner who has fathered an eclamptic pregnancy earlier. So whenever the woman is having repeated preeclampsia, when there is a change of partner, there could be risk, there could be chances that she may have normal pregnancy this time. So which suggests that there could be paternal factor in the development of preeclampsia. Coming to pregnancy factors, when there is multiple pregnancy due to the huge size of the placenta, there is a hydatidiform mole, hydrops fetalis, or fetal chromosomal anomalies. The most commonly is trisomy 13. Then the underlying medical diseases like chronic hypertension, diabetes mellitus, renal diseases, cardiovascular diseases, hyperthyroidism, metabolic syndrome, hyperhomocystinemia, autoimmune diseases like SLE, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, and thrombophilias. These are the other conditions which could be associated with preeclampsia. Others are obesity when the BMI is more than 35, psychological stress and strain, smoking, or previous history of preeclampsia. Coming to the pathophysiology. How does this develop in a woman? There are two stage models for the development of preeclampsia. Stage 1, where there is reduced placental implantation. Stage 2, where there is maternal syndrome like hypertension, proteinuria, endothelial dysfunction. Reduced placental implantation, that is stage 1 of pathophysiology. The predisposing factors are again abnormal implantation of the placenta associated with a microvascular diseases like diabetes, hypertension, associated with large placentas like in hydrops, multiple gestation, and H-mole. Look at the figure here. What happens? In normal pregnancy, there is invasion of the trophoblasts into the decidual layer. So what happens? There is first wave of invasion at 12 weeks, and then there is again secondary wave of invasion of the cytotrophoblasts into the decidual spiral arteries at 16 weeks. What happens as a result of this invasion? It converts high resistance low capacitance vessels into low resistance high capacitance vessels. So as a result, it becomes relaxed. The elasticity is lost and the spiral arteries becomes dilated and tortuous, so that it will have more amount of blood in its lumen. So look at the normal vessel and the preeclamptic woman. In the preeclamptic woman, the spiral arteries doesn't dilate. Again, the same thing in the picture. What happens? The smooth muscle in the tunica media of the vascular vessels is replaced by this trophoblast. But in the preeclamptic women, it is not replaced. As a result, the vessel remains of the same size. As well as in normal pregnancy, the size of the vessel, the lumen, doubles, almost doubles. Here, there is failure of this mechanism in a woman who is going to present with a preeclampsia or hypertensive disorders of pregnancy later in a pregnancy. What happens as a result? Net effect. There is replacement of the endothelial lining and muscular arterial wall by the trophoblast cells, which results in distended tortuous spiral arteries. So it is converted into low resistance, low pressure, high flow system. Etiological factors. What are the factors which leads to such pathophysiological changes? Like placental hypoxia, immunological factors, placental enzymes, genetic factors like methyl transfolate reductase deficiency, oxidative stress. What causes this maternal syndrome? In stage 1, there is reduced placental implantation. Stage 2, again, as I told you, there is development of the signs and symptoms of this preeclampsia. What gets into the maternal circulation? In stage 2 of the pathophysiology, not just hypertension and proteinuria, but also it involves the end organ and leads to end organ damage. Physiology of maintenance of uteroplacental flow in normal pregnancy. What happens? This placenta releases angiotensinase, which leads to destruction of angiotensin 2, which is a potent vasoconstrictor. As a result, the BP is stabilized. Vascular synthesis of PGI2 and nitrous oxide, which are vasodilators, and again, since these are vasodilators, it leads to stabilization of BP and uteroplacental flow is maintained. Then release of vascular endothelial growth factor. Again, this also restores uteroplacental flow. Normal balance. There is always normal balance of agonist and antagonistic factors like vasodilators and vasoconstrictors, and angiogenic and anti-angiogenic factors. Coming to the vasodilators and the vasoconstrictors. Which are the vasodilators? Nitrous oxide and PGI2, which is released from syncytial trophoblast and endothelium. Whereas vasoconstrictors are angiotensin 2, endothelin 1 and thromboxane A2, which is released from the placenta. And coming to the angiogenic and anti-angiogenic factors. Angiogenic factor, that is, there is decrease in the vascular endothelial growth factor, TGF beta and PIGF. Whereas anti-angiogenic factors are increased. So in gestational hypertension, the possible mechanism of action is there is abnormal cytotrophoblastic invasion. So there is which leads to decreased uterine placental blood flow, leading to placental ischemia, release of cytokine factors from the placenta, which leads to endothelial dysfunction because there is improper balance between the vasodilators and the vasoconstrictors. As a result, here there is increase in the vasoconstrictors and decrease in the vasodilators, which leads to decreased renal perfusion, causing natriuresis and hypertension. Basic mechanism of different end organ damage. How does it occur? Because there is increased vasoconstriction due to the angiogenic factors and vasoconstrictors. There is decreased, as a result, there is decreased organ perfusion, increased endothelial dysfunction leading to capillary leakage, edema, pulmonary edema, proteinuria, activation of coagulation factors which may lead to DIC and low platelets, and hemoconcentration. So there is involvement of almost all the organs of the body. Multi-system features of preeclampsia. What happens? There is multi-organ involvement leading to multi-organ disease. On the systemic blood vessels, there is vasoconstriction leading to hypertension. In the kidneys, there is endotheliosis and leakage of the protein leading to proteinuria. In the cerebral vessels, if there is vasoconstriction, it might lead to eclampsia. In the fetus, it will lead to IUGR, IUD, oligohydramnios, and in the liver, it leads to HELLP syndrome. Due to decreased uteroplacental flow, IUGR. Hematological impact, which may cause epistaxis, DIC-like features, and hemoconcentration. That's why in preeclamptic women, there is raised hemoglobin, which masks the effect of anemia. Say if a PIH patient has anemia, that effect will be usually masked. Then CNS, which causes cerebral edema, cerebral hemorrhage, leads to seizures. In heart, there is subendothelial hemorrhage, focal necrosis and hemorrhage, cardiomyopathy, heart failure. In the lungs, pulmonary edema, hemorrhagic bronchopneumonia. In the kidneys, glomerular endotheliosis and oliguria. In the liver, There is subcapsular hemorrhages which leads to stretching of the capsule leading to subcapsular hemorrhage, ischemia, periportal necrosis and HELP syndrome. In the CVS involvement, there is increased peripheral resistance, decreased pregnancy-induced hypervolemia, alveolar endothelial damage and decreased plasma oncotic pressure, decreased blood volume than the normal pregnancy, that is 16% in these patients versus 50% in the normal pregnancy, which leads to decreased cardiac output and heart failure. In the hematological system, there is thrombocytopenia and other platelet abnormalities. This is because of platelet activation and degranulation, decreased lifespan of the platelets, which correlates well with the severity of the disease. That is, in mild hypertension, as we have seen earlier, there is no decrease in the platelet count, whereas in the severe variety of the gestational hypertension and in the preeclampsia, what happens? The platelet decreases. So it directly correlates with the severity of the disease. Intravascular hemolysis due to endothelial damage and altered fluidity of the erythrocyte membrane due to change in serum lipid content, which leads to increased LDH, spherocytosis, reticulocytosis, which leads to microangiopathic hemolysis, and increased coagulation and fibrinolysis, because that's why there will be features like DIC, release of thromboplastin, decreased fibrinogen, increased angiotensin and plasminogen, antithrombin 3, sorry. In the renal system, what happens? There is decreased renal perfusion due to decreased blood volume and increased afferent arteriolar pressure. Then there is decreased GFR. Why? Because glomerular capillary endotheliosis, endothelial dysfunction, mesangial swelling, basement membrane disruption, but podocyte disruption is predominant. And there is oliguria because of which leads to increased creatinine level and increased uric acid level. Hepatic involvement, what happens? There is periportal hemorrhagic necrosis, hematoma formation, which causes stretching and rupture of the capsule over the liver, which leads to subcapsular hemorrhage and also capsular stretching, so that clinically the patient presents with epigastric pain. So this is one of the signs of the severity of the disease, what we call as premonitory symptoms. In the clinical postings you might have heard. What are the premonitory symptoms of the severe PIH? Epigastric pain is one of it. Why epigastric pain? Because it indicates the liver involvement, because there is stretching of the liver capsule. Then the brain involvement. What happens in brain? Due to acute severe hypertension, cerebrovascular overregulation, there is vasospasm, parenchymal ischemia, cytotoxic edema, and when there is sudden increase in the systolic BP, which exceeds normal range of cerebrovascular autoregulation, there is forced vasodilatation and hyperperfusion leading to vasogenic edema. In the lungs involvement, high blood pressure, increased arteriolar pressure, increased extravasation of blood into the alveoli, rupture of the alveoli leading to pulmonary edema and hemorrhagic bronchopneumonia as shown in the chest X-ray. How can you predict the preeclampsia? What are the predictive factors? There are many tests during early pregnancy or across pregnancy of various biological, biochemical and biophysical markers which predict the possibility of developing preeclampsia. The most predictive investigative procedures are cumbersome, time consuming and with a poor sensitivity and with a poor positive predictive value for preeclampsia. That's why it has no much importance nowadays. The efficacy of the preventive methods is questionable too. Currently, no screening tests are predictably reliable, valid and economical. But this is only for theoretical knowledge. You should be knowing it. Trials of different preventive methods and the outcomes. So, there are certain methods which have been tried to decrease the risk of development of preeclampsia. Say like diet and exercise. If there is dietary modification like salt restriction and exercise, regular exercises, certain studies have shown, but there is insufficient evidence, so there is no reduction. Protein or salt restriction also has shown no much reduction in the development of preeclampsia. It's not recommended. Even the magnesium and zinc. The most commonly used methods are calcium supplementation, that is 2 gram per day, low dose aspirin in high risk cases like bad obstetric history, repeated placental abruption, repeated pregnancy losses, or in autoimmune diseases like SLE, such conditions, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, in such cases to prevent the development of preeclampsia, low dose aspirin is given, and it is considered mainly only in high risk pregnancies where there is reduction in the risk of preeclampsia by 19%. Then heparin or low molecular weight, again there is lack of studies, but still it is recommended in high risk women. Then antioxidant vitamin C, E. It has reduced the incidence of preeclampsia in few trials, but still there is insufficient evidence to say it. Antihypertensive medication in women is started in with chronic hypertension. Here there is decreased in the reduction of development of preeclampsia, superimposed preeclampsia. What are the provocative pressure tests which indicates that this patient might develop preeclampsia? That is predictive tests. 3 tests have been extensively evaluated to assess the blood pressure rise in response to a stimulus. What is the first one? The most commonly used rollover test. What is this rollover test? You can do it in your outpatient department when the patient comes to you for the ANC checkup. After resting in the left lateral position, turning to a supine position induces a rise in the diastolic pressure of 20 mmHg or more. When it rises, it is called a positive test and indicates the development of preeclampsia later in pregnancy. This can be started from 28 to 32 weeks of pregnancy. One more is hand grip test. Here, isometric sustained contraction of the striated muscles is known to cause general sympathetic activation and hence increased systemic arterial pressure in healthy adults. So, how the test is performed? The patient compresses an inflated sphygmomanometer cuff for a 3-minute period at maximal, and then at 50% of maximal voluntary contraction, there is increase in the diastolic pressure of more than 20. It is again performed at 28 to 32 weeks of gestation, and it is associated with increased incidence of gestational hypertension and preeclampsia, eclampsia. The most common used is in clinical practice uterine artery Doppler velocimetries. It is most promising, but currently none of them is completely suitable for clinical use. These have value for growth restriction rather than predicting the preeclampsia. As a result of these trials, some methods to prevent preeclampsia have been only theorized. What happens to the uterine artery Doppler? In normal pregnancy, this is the systolic and the peak is the systolic and the dip is the diastolic. Whereas in preeclampsia, what happens? The notch appears at the diastolic or there is end diastolic flow. There are 3 types of changes. The notch is the earliest, then there could be decreased, absent or reversed diastolic flow, which again depends upon the severity of the disease. But the notch is the earliest predictive factor as early as 20 weeks of pregnancy. Coming to the urinary assays. Microalbuminuria, which is detected by radioimmunoassay before albuminuria can be detected by the ordinary methods. The drawback is that not all proteinuric preeclampsia are preceded by this phase, and sensitivity ranges from 7 to 90%, whereas specific is only 29 to 97%. 24-hour urinary calcium excretion is lower in women with preeclampsia than normotensive pregnant women. Kallikrein creatinine ratio. It is reduced in patient who develop PIH later on if compared to the increased ratio in normal pregnancy, because this kallikrein is a blood pressure reducing agent. Then prostaglandin metabolites. The end metabolite of prostacyclin is decreased, while thromboxane B2, which is the metabolite of thromboxane A2, is increased in urine of preeclamptic women. That is, again the vasoconstrictors are increased, which is an indicator. The other blood test which could be performed are plasma urate levels. Just not on one occasion. What is more important is serial increase, which is a warning of PIH before appropriate appearance of the clinical features appear. Then platelet count. A reduction occurs early in the preeclampsia patients. Antithrombin 3 activity begins to decline as much as 13 weeks prior to the development of clinical manifestations of preeclampsia. And these were the predictive tests, both biophysical, biochemical and clinical methods. Now, how will you prevent? We can aim at preventing the development of preeclampsia. How? At the pre-pregnancy level, that is even before the patient conceives, you can aim at preventing the development of preeclampsia. How? By asking her to reduce the weight to the ideal BMI. Control of glucose levels if the patient is diabetic. Control of BP if she is a known case of chronic hypertension by diet modification and exercises. And adding low dose aspirin 75 mg in high risk patients from 12 weeks of pregnancy once a day. And calcium 500 mg twice a day. What is not recommended or not important is vitamin C and E, which have been shown in the previous chat for reducing the incidence of preeclampsia. Then dietary salt restriction is also not needed. It has not shown any much difference in decreasing. Antihypertensive therapy to prevent preeclampsia? No. Again, antihypertensive therapy should be started only when there is criteria, like when there is BP is more than or equal to 150 mm Hg by 100 diastolic. Coming to the history, what should you stress when it comes to history? The special points to be noted in a preeclamptic woman are patient particulars, age, because young age less than 18 and more than 35 have the risk of developing preeclampsia. Again, it is more common in nulliparity and low socioeconomic status. These are the risk factors. In chief complaints, there is swelling of legs or other parts of the body, including face, abdominal wall, vulva or whole body, and tightness of the finger. And the features which points out towards severe diseases are headache, visual changes like blurring and decreased visual acuity, nausea, vomiting, abdominal or epigastric pain and oliguria, insomnia, vaginal bleeding, seizures. What should you ask for in the present obstetric history? Like onset, duration, severity of hypertension, whether it is associated with the proteinuria, and there was any history of drug intake. In the past obstetric history of any hypertensive disorders of pregnancy in the previous pregnancy and at what weeks of gestation it was started. Also note the interval since last pregnancy, gestational age at delivery, any fetal complications. In the past history of any pre-existing conditions like hypertension, renal diseases, diabetes, thrombophilia or thyroid disorders. Family history, ask for family history of hypertension, preeclampsia in any of our family members, especially the siblings and mother, then any presence of diabetes or cardiovascular diseases in the family members. Coming to the physical examination, what should you look for? Obesity, when the BMI is more than 35 kgs per square meter. Weight, how should you measure? There is serial measurement, just once measurement is not important. There should be serial measurement which could tell you about the possibility of developing preeclampsia. Gain in weight in the normal pregnancy is at the rate of 0.5 kgs per week or 2 kgs per month. But when there is gain of more than 0.5 kgs in a week or more than 2.5 kgs a month in the later month of pregnancy, it is the earliest sign of preeclampsia. Edema at all the sites has to be pathological, meaning visible pitting edema demonstrable over the ankles after 12 hours of bed rest. If it's a physiological, what happens? After a rest of 12 hours, that physiological edema will come down. But even if the edema persists after 12 hours of bed rest, it should be considered as pathological. Then BP. It should be measured in the right arm in the sitting or supine position. Arm at the level of the heart. Cuff length should be 1.5 times of the arm circumference. Diastolic BP is the disappearance of Korsakoff sounds. That is phase 5 is taken here, not the phase 4. Taken on 2 occasions at least 6 hours apart to confirm that it is hypertensive disorder of pregnancy. In CVS examination, auscultation of the heart sound should be done. Look for the rhythm, splitting of S2 or murmurs if there is associated anemia, because coexistence of anemia and hypertensive disorders of pregnancy is more common. Ophthalmic examination to reveal or to detect retinal hemorrhages, nicking of veins, arterial and vein ratio if 3:1 from 3:2, and development by performing a simple fundoscopic examination. This fundoscopic examination is mainly not to diagnose PIH, it is to know about the severity of the end organ involvement, because you have to balance between continuing the pregnancy and terminating the pregnancy based upon this end organ involvement. Then what happens to the deep tendon reflexes? Either there is hyperreflexia or there is presence of clonus. Coming to the obstetric examination, there is no much differences in the obstetric examination except if the patient has IUGR and oligo, which is more common in hypertensive patients. The findings could be there. That is, per abdomen, you feel the gestational age lesser than the calculated gestational age. Maternal investigations. What you would like to do in a patient with a hypertensive disorders? The test may be abnormal even when BP elevation is minimal. That is why you shouldn't judge based on the BP whether the patient should be evaluated or not. Any patient diagnosed as hypertension, the baseline investigations has to be done. Like urine dipstick testing for proteinuria, quantification by lab methods if it is more than or equal to 1 plus on dipstick testing, urinary albumin creatinine ratio to detect significant proteinuria if it is more than 30 milligram per millimoles. 24-hour urine collection is not necessary in routine clinical management. Routine blood examination, which includes total leukocyte count, differential count, peripheral smear, BTCT, hemoglobin percentage, serum urea, creatinine, electrolytes including lactate dehydrogenase and uric acid, because in PIH patients both LDH and uric acid is raised. Liver function test includes AST ALT, which is significant, where we have already told that the values will be twice the normal. Skyogram of the chest, PA view, pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, brain natriuretic peptide, because you need to diagnose pulmonary edema. Diagnosing preeclampsia, eclampsia. How will you diagnose? Here, as I have told earlier, there is hypertension along with the proteinuria also and organ damage. So proteinuria could be present or absent, but hypertension will always be associated with end organ damage or proteinuria to tell it as preeclampsia. When BP is more than or equal to 140/90 at or after 20 weeks of gestation on 2 occasions at least 6 hours apart during bed rest, 160/90 of BP is severe disease, accompanied by one or more of significant proteinuria. That is, dipstick test shows 1 plus or more, random urinary protein creatinine ratio more than 30 mg, 24-hour urine excretion more than 300 milligram. Renal involvement by serum creatinine more than 90 millimole per liter, oliguria when the urine output is less than 400 ml in 24 hours. Hematological involvement, platelet count will be less than 1 lakhs. Liver involvement, how it is detected? By raised AST and ALT to more than twice the normal, that is more than 70. Severe upper abdominal pain because there is subcapsular hemorrhage and stretching of the liver capsule leading to abdominal pain and epigastric pain. Neurological involvement by severe headache, persistent visual disturbances, hyperreflexia with sustained clonus, convulsions and stroke which occurs in eclampsia. There is development of pulmonary edema, fetal growth restriction and placental abruption. So now I want to conclude this session. Meet you in the next class with the remaining part of the hypertensive disorders of pregnancy.